Welcome to Reality Checks. So this is where we'll unpack and take a quick look at practical, quick things financial planning businesses often assume are working until real life quietly proves otherwise. So today's reality check is this: your standard operating procedure is not the process. I know it's a rude way to start, but it does matter. So many businesses spend time creating standard operating procedures or SOPs, checklists, workflows, file notes, templates, and all sorts of internal guidance documents. And that's a very good thing. Please don't think that I'm saying documentation doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. A written process gives structure, it gives a reference point, it helps with training, and it supports consistency. It gives people something to come back to when there's uncertainty, and it can also help demonstrate governance, oversight, and accountability. So yes, please don't, stop documenting your processes. But the uncomfortable part is that the document is not the actual process. The real process is what people actually do on a busy Tuesday morning when three clients are chasing feedbacks, one team member is on leave, the advisor is in meetings, and the CRM system is not playing along, and someone says, "Don't worry, I'll just quickly sort it out." So that is where your actual real life process lives, not in the beautifully formatted PDF document, not in the SharePoint folder that you've created, and not in the training sessions that you've done. The real process lives in the behavior of your team. It lives in the handover from one person to another. It lives in the shortcuts people maybe take when they're under pressure, or the questions people ask. And it lives in what gets escalated, what gets ignored, what gets fixed, and what gets quietly kind of patched so the client doesn't really notice. And this is where many financial planning practices get caught, because they believe they've solved the problem because the SOP document exists, or the process document exists. It's saved, the template is approved, and everyone is kind of happy. The team has been told where to find it, and they think, wonderful, we're ready to go. But then when you look at the actual day-to-day workflow, you may find something very, very different, because one person will maybe follow the SOP properly, but another person has maybe created their own version because, they don't really like everything of the process and it doesn't quite work for them. And a third person may just skip steps because they're under pressure or they don't have the time. And someone else inevitably will be there who doesn't even know that there is a version or there is a document. So the founder and the practice manager or the operations manager often has to step in continuously to just quickly fix it, and it means that the team never really has to follow the process from start to finish, because there's always someone to kind of rescue them and fix the problem. And that isn't a documentation problem. You're not going to fix it by giving them more documentation or more processes. It's very much an implementation problem. And that's very common, because writing down a process is easier than embedding it into the business. Embedding a process means asking harder questions. Do people know when to use it? Do they know why it matters? Is it built into the tools that they're already using? Or if there was an existing business process, was it slotted in at the right space to make sense? Or is it creating bottlenecks that you're maybe not aware of? And is it realistic for the way that the business actually works? Is anyone checking whether it's being followed? That's the other thing, or is everyone just assuming that, the process is there, everyone must be following it? You also need to ask, is there a clear escalation point, when something doesn't fit neatly? So if someone maybe picks up a bottleneck or a problem with the process, can they escalate it? And is it something that they can have trust, that you will actually see if you can fix it or improve it and make it better for them? And perhaps, also important is what happens if people don't follow it. Because if nothing happens, then there's never any real reason to follow the SOP, because it remains optional. or a polite suggestion. It's just sitting there in a folder, minding its own business, and people can choose to use it or not to use it. So when a business is small, those informal ways of working can feel quite manageable, and you often don't even notice it because people sit close together. Everyone hears what everyone else is saying, and there's kind of a constant communication happening, which, people can overhear if there's something, and they can actually step in to fix it before it becomes a real problem. But I hate to break it to you, that's not sustainable, because as your business grows, whether it's that you've got more physical actual clients and business coming in, or that you've got a bigger team that you manage, but as the practice grows, that informal communication and knowledge becomes very risky, because with more clients and more team members, you've got more moving parts that are happening, and you've often got more compliance expectations and things coming in, that kind of can throw a spanner in the works. And there's just overall more opportunities for things to start falling through the cracks. And at that point, we all know how it works is not the process, it's just a hope. So we have to make sure that people actually do know, that we're not assuming that they know, but they actually do know. The other risk in that standard operating procedure is that it can create a false sense of comfort. So management may think, oh, we've got a process for that. But the better question is the process alive in the business? Can someone new follow it quite easily? Is it easy for them to access a document, read through it, and understand what they need to do? Can someone step away if they're going on leave or something like that, and someone else can step in quite easily and the business can just continue to flow? Or is there a gap because things stayed in that person's memory and they didn't write it down anywhere? And how does the process look and work under pressure? If people are overworked, it's maybe a peak time of the business. Are they skipping corners, or are they able to still follow the process? Does it still make time, and does it still make sense to them to follow the process? And does it produce the right evidence? Because it needs to support that client experience. And I'm not talking evidence just from a compliance perspective, but also from a client experience perspective. Does it reduce confusion? Does it create accountability? Or does it simply describe what everyone wishes would happen on a perfect day? Because a process that only works on a perfect day is not very useful. Your real processes need to survive real humans. So that includes busy humans, tired humans, helpful humans, distracted humans, humans who mean well but are trying to do 17 things before lunch. That is why the implementation layer matters. It's not enough to ask, do we have an SOP? The better reality check is what actually happens. Follow the work, watch the handovers, look at the file notes, check the exceptions, and ask the team where they get stuck. Ask what they do when the process does not fit the situation, and ask who makes the decision, who checks the outcome and, kind of deals with the exceptions and the out of the norm situations that don't fit. And that is where you'll see whether your process exists in practice or only on paper. So for today's reality check, choose one process in your business, just one, not all of it. Something ordinary and quite straightforward, maybe the client onboarding process or a standard annual review process, new business submission, something that's quite straightforward, and then ask 3 simple questions. First, where's the process documented? Second, is the team actually following it? And third, how do we know? That third question is the one that usually bites, because if the answer is, well, I assume they are, then you don't really have an oversight. You have optimism in business clothing. And while optimism is lovely, it should not be your control environment. Your SOP matters, but it's only the starting point. The real work is turning the document into behavior, the behavior into consistency, and the consistency into something the business can rely on. That is the difference between having a process and having a process that really works. And that's the reality check for today.